Robert Estrada,
Here.
Brian Parsons,
Present.
Lynn Larson is excused. Philip Combs is excused. Paul Wagaman,
Present.
Ryan Pearson,
Here.
and Don Daniels is excused. You do have quorum.
Thank you. Before we have the meeting minutes from June 15th, 2022, looking for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Yep.
Second.
All right, looks like we have a motion to approve in a second. Any changes? And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The meeting minutes pass. And the next thing, any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we would request that we reorder the items to allow item 8 to occur before item 6.
Is 5, okay, so we're happy 5 is going before 8 as well?
We can either do number 8 before 5, or we could do number 8 before 6. It's up to you.
I think 8 before 5 is what Ms. Michter was talking about
Okay.
earlier, so.
Okay, yeah, that's perfectly fine, Mr. Chair.
Yep, okay. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
And then I guess, yeah, you're up for,
Good to go?
yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 1 second. So good evening, Mr. Chair. Tiffany Spear, Long Range and Strategic Planning Manager for the City of Lakewood. This evening, we're going to start with the biennial review of the Downtown Siberia Plan. This is the second of these biennial reviews that have been conducted by Lakewood since this sub-area plan, development code, and planned action ordinance were adopted in 2018. There are 2 ordinances that govern this process, number 695 and 696. They were both again adopted in 2018. And the reviews are directed by those 2 ordinances to include the impact of the code, the development code in implementing the plan, and then looking for whether amendments are needed during those reviews to the associated regulations and code itself and the plan. Monitoring the progress of development within the downtown sub-area, make sure it is consistent with the plan itself, as well as the environmental impact statement for the adopted plan action. Reviewing the continuing relevance of the planned action assumptions and findings with respect to environmental conditions in the planned action area, the impacts of development that have occurred, and making sure that the required mitigation measures are still accurate based on development that has happened since adoption. The final piece to the every 2-year review is the review of the transportation mitigation fees, which were instituted for the downtown sub-area. In 2020, one of these reviews was conducted, and at that point, there were no recommendations to make any changes to what I will call tonight the DSAP package, which is the Downtown Sub-Area Plan package, all 3 of those pieces, because the plan and the package were less than 18 months old at that point, and it was felt that there just hadn't been enough time to see if development was going to react favorably or not to what was being suggested in the package. Tonight, we'll be looking at the development and redevelopment that has occurred since the end of 2020 through the end of, the beginning of 2020 through the end of 21. And what we're going to be suggesting this evening from the city's perspective to you is that no changes substantially be made to the downtown sub-area plan, development code, or planned action. However, there is a recommendation to change the way future types of these reviews would be timed and what they may contain. So what is being suggested to you this evening to consider is to look at the downtown sub-area plan, the regulations which are contained within Lakewood Municipal Code Title 18B, and then the related SEPA planned action ordinance and the transportation mitigation fee. Take that forward to the 2024 comprehensive plan periodic update, rather than doing it as its own review. 2024 would be the next time the regular biennial review for this document or package would be required. However, the 2024 periodic update is a very large effort that's going to be kicking off actually this fall and internal preparation for it. And the downtown Siberia plan is actually part of the comprehensive plan anyway, under the Growth Management Act. So we are suggesting or recommending that as part of the larger review, the next biennial review for downtown occurs, and it would just be rolled into what you would receive for consideration and public hearing. The next recommendation is that the frequency of future reviews change from every 2 years, or at least every 2 years, to at least every 5 years after 2024. And what that would mean is there would be this review as part of the periodic update in 24. And then after that, the following review of the downtown package would happen in 2029. And then in 2034 would be the next periodic review. And so it again would be rolled into the comp plan process, and ongoing it would happen. If, however, as you see in number 3, something came up that needed to be handled in a more time-sensitive way than every 5 years, it would be incorporated into the city's annual comprehensive plan review and development regulation review that happens already on an annual basis and comes before you. So if there were for some reason something that needed to change more quickly, we would incorporate it into that process. So to go over some of the things that have happened in 2020 and 2021, there were additional projects from the adopted downtown Siberia plan's environmental impact statement, as well as plan itself, that were identified on the transportation front. And so you see 8 projects listed, and on the right-hand side of the table, you'll see that there was 100% cost in 2018 dollars assumed, and then there was a decision by the city council ultimately to say that half of that would be paid for through public dollars and half of it would be paid for through the transportation mitigation fees. So the numbers here that you see are the 28.9 million total, and then the 14.47 million to be covered by the transportation fees. Progress to date is that you see here several projects have been completed either last year or this year. One was the 100th Street and Lakewood Drive traffic signal replacement, which also incorporated drainage overlay improvements and street lighting. And then there was also the installation of missing sidewalks along 59th between Bridgeport and 100th Street Southwest, which was completed this May. There is also, as you see here, additional dollars that have been set aside for a new traffic signal at Avondale and Gravelly Lake Drive. And then in 2022, there has been a grant application submitted to the state's Transportation Improvement Board for sidewalks to go in on 59th Avenue from 100th to Bridgeport Way. Any questions on transportation? On the park front, and I apologize, you can't see through that black top line there, but this is parks improvements. And if you'll recall, in 2020, there was a legacy parks plan that was adopted by the city council. And within the 2020 adoption was parks improvements from the 2018 downtown plan. In particular, you'll see this table here identifying a downtown park. The assumed cost or estimated cost as of 2020 for a 2-acre park would be $15 million for the property acquisition. And then there would be other costs for development of, for instance, the downtown spray park and other improvements at the location. The assumption would be if the city were actually able to identify a larger piece, there was a conversation in the plan itself of perhaps having a 4-acre park rather than 2. We would simply double the cost for acquisition. The amount there would be $30 million rather than $15 million. The idea here is that the spray park that's mentioned in the legacy plan would be included as part of the downtown park. In 2021, Kite Realty purchased the Lakewood Town Center, so the mall right adjacent to City Hall. It was formerly owned by RPAI, and it is again now owned by Kite Realty. This has started a new round of conversations regarding a number of things about Town Center. And so far, all of the conversations have been very positive. Kite Realty has been interested in talking to the city about not only a potential city park within the town center, but also looking to find partners through the city's connection for creating mixed-use development, which is what is planned for in the sub-area plan. A lot of higher density housing as well as commercial and retail properties being developed here in town center. So as we continue to discuss things with them, things are moving forward. There was a little hiccup as they had some staff transition, but we are planning to meet with them later this month to continue the discussion. Contaminated properties is another item that the city council tracks through both downtown and elsewhere in the city. Right now, there are, as you see here on this map, there's 3 shown on this little excerpt, but there's 3 or 4 different projects within the downtown boundaries that have had action taken within recent years. And I'll just jump right over to the next page to show that. The property that is at 9152 Gravely Lake Drive Southwest. We continue to have our economic development manager contacting property owners to figure out where they're at in terms of environmental cleanup. The former Chevron site at 10202 Gravely Lake Drive Southwest. Right now, as of October of 22, there is an anticipated sale and closure of that sale on the property, and that the new owner has expressed an interest in putting in a retail or convenience store at that location. The Ken's Tire site, 9601 Gravely Lake Drive Southwest. At this point, as of March 31st of this year, the application was signed for VCP according to the property owner contact, and they're waiting on a cleanup plan. The anticipated start of that cleanup is spring of 2022. And finally, in Lakewood Town Center, there's dry cleaner locations operated within the mall, or were operated within the mall. And as of May of this year, the city is working with Kite, talking about not only improving those sites for other development, but also possibly using one of those sites for a central park. This map will show you what has been going on with private development interest within the downtown sub area. There are 22 projects total, 19 of which are new from the time period of January 1, 2020 to December 31st of 2021. There were 3 that actually overlapped a little bit just with timing of the applications: T Uppercuts, On's Tailoring and Cleaning, and Altitude Trampoline Park. And the trampoline park now, I believe, has a different name, but if you've noticed right across from Hops and Drops, they just put their sign up. So that business should be opening very soon. Speaking to the transportation mitigation fees, with the beginning of 2019 and through the end of 21, a total of almost $173 million were assessed, and most had been collected. You'll see there in underline 23 of the 34 projects were not assessed any transportation mitigation fees in the downtown area because the city's program ultimately was drafted to say that there are only going to be fees charged on net increases to transportation trips. So if it is a pre-existing site that had some former use, when a new applicant comes in and talks about their project, the city only looks at whether there will be additional trips beyond what had been there before to figure out what type of mitigation fee they may be charged. So as of December 31st of 21, a total of $141,825 had actually been collected. Again, apologies for not showing the whole thing on top, but essentially this is showing you that the lines are slowly moving up. Since the end of 2019 and coming into 2020, obviously we had the start of the COVID pandemic, and that significantly affected and slowed economic development, not only in Lakewood, but all over Pierce County, all over the region, all over the state. But we're starting to see this spring things start to pick up once again. And so the tables that you see here include the development services, permits and fees, so land use as well as building permit. The chart on the right is strictly building permit fees. And then you'll see on the bottom a comparison line chart in both of those squares of by month 2020 budget, 2020 actual, and then 2021 actual. And if you look at the green line on both of those charts, you'll see that as of March, things had started to come up above budget by a significant amount. So again, our conclusion, as was mentioned at the start, is that we're talking about perhaps not having any changes made to the plan, the development code, or to the transportation mitigation fee program, and no changes to the environmental impact statement assumptions in this 2022 review. That the next review is recommended to be incorporated into the 24 periodic update rather than having it done separately. And then beyond that, changing the continuing review cycles from every 2 years to every 5 years. So the next review after 2024 would occur in 2029. And then finally, the last bullet there, if there were more time-sensitive issues identified, they could be incorporated into the annual comprehensive plan and development regulation reviews. So where this sits is a week from tonight, there will be a public hearing on what's been proposed here by the city. If the Planning Commission wanted to add anything or request any additional amendments, you could certainly do that. And then Planning Commission action after that public hearing is scheduled for July 20th. Assuming the Planning Commission does take action that evening, this would move forward to the to the City Council to review your recommendations starting on August 22nd. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will stop sharing and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions?
Just one question, the change from 2 to 5 years, was there any reason around the 2 years originally around there, any requirements?
There were no legal requirements for that. That came from the City Council's concern that if new requirements and became too onerous, that they actually started pushing businesses away from coming into the downtown. They would know about that pretty quickly and be able to make changes. And what we have observed from the staff's perspective is, again, the first two, or the 2020 review, it was just too soon. And then after COVID, we're still getting our legs back under us. And so we're not suggesting any changes at this time.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? I had one question. The transportation mitigation fees, is there, if a building remains vacant for a certain period of time, say 5 years or 6 years, do they then have to pay transportation mitigation fees, or are they still locked in as long as there's no change in use?
I don't know if Ms. Brunel wants to jump in, but if memory serves, the way the system is set up is regardless of how long the building has been empty, if it was already pre-existing prior to the adoption of this downtown plan, simply looking at the last use that was there, how many trips it generated, and then looking at the new use to compare if there was a net increase or not.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, and we use the ITE trip generation manual for that, and it's monitored by our Public Works Engineering Department.
Yep, thank you. All right. So are we done with number 8 now?
Yeah, unless there's any other questions from you, Mr. Chair, that is the conclusion of this topic, and we can move on to the rest of the agenda.
Okay, I do think that we were waiting until 7 o'clock to start the rest of it, so I don't know what we want to do for 12 minutes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I wanted to address the whole audience so that everybody's on the same page about where we're at.
Yep.
The City of Lakewood apologizes to those of you who are sitting and waiting patiently. This meeting typically does start at 6:30, and we had planned on taking public comment as we usually would, and we will. The reason that we have set that off until after 7 o'clock is because the city in error sent out a notice that said that it was going to be 7 o'clock when we held the public hearing. And while we could take the public comments in advance of 7 o'clock, we wanted to alleviate any issue that way and just start the public comments, both the comments and the public hearing at 7. And so I apologize for inconvenience to you. I know a half an hour of a public committee meeting is not always the most entertaining way to pass your time, but we're trying to make sure that we don't disadvantage anyone who may have wanted to hear all the comments. So thank you. Yes, 7. Yes, thank you. So with that, Mr. Chair, if there isn't other business, then my recommendation is that we wait until 7 to allow for all members of the public to be here for the public comment and the public hearing.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
You want to recess for about 10 minutes, then, Mr. Chair?
Yep, recess for 10. Sorry, folks, yeah, for the confusion.
Unless you want to say on the record that we are in recess until 7 p.m.
For the record, we are recessing until 7 p.m. to begin item number 5, public comment. Okay. So 7 o'clock now, and we will start back up with the public comment. The first thing I was going to do is invite Heidi Walker up to explain the public comment process. I think she already did a little bit, but go for it.
Thank you. I'm Heidi Walker. I'm the city attorney for the city of Lakewood. And tonight we have both a public comment period and we also have a public hearing. And I want to make sure that people are understanding the distinction between the two, because I'm sure that some of you are here for a particular purpose. Public comment is any comment you wish to make. It's time limited, but you're all willing to make a public comment. It's a general comment period, and statements will generally, very generally, not verbatim, be reflected in the meeting minutes. They will not, however, become part of a legislative record for any of the items coming before the body. They will simply be reflected in the minutes. So the commission, at the time for a hearing, which some of you may be expecting tonight, think of that hearing as a box. The box is closed throughout the public comment period. You may make whatever comments you like, but they will not go into the box that is the legislative record for the tree preservation code. At the time that we open that box for the public hearing, I will be back before you saying you may make whatever comments you wish at that time. Those comments go in the box. We don't have a debate about them. They simply go in, and ultimately when we finish that period, those comments will go into the legislative record for this item. This is the kind of thing that typically only lawyers love, those kinds of distinctions. But later in the process, if we get into questions about what happened, what went into the making of this legislation, you are part of it when your comments are in the public hearing. Your comments, no matter how valid, legitimate, well-researched they are, if they are made in the public comment period, they may be in the notes somewhere as part of the meeting minutes, but they won't be part of the legislative record. I just wanted to make that clear. And with that, you have your public comment period right now, the ones that will appear in the minutes, but not in the legislative record.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we do have 3 folks on the list. And does anyone, there's Christina Minetti, James Dunlop, and Carol Else. You folks all wish to have these comments in the public comment? Seeing nothing else, I will call Christina Minetti. She's up first. Please state the city and you reside in and your full name, please.
Christina Minetti of Lakewood. I'd like to comment on the public comments that were submitted for this hearing, because as you know, there was a problem with them. That's what those tables were about that they printed out there. On June 29th, I found the city had blocked my email address and that of the Action Network, a well-known platform used to send in public comments. We've used it before, twice, with over 30 comments with no problem. There was no problem with spam either. So that meant that almost 80 people couldn't submit their public comments that were due on June 30th at noon ahead of the Planning Commission hearing on July 6th. You can read the details in a written statement if you like. Then after the deadline, except for 2, about 80 or so obviously fake comments were submitted through the Action Network platform, which I'm the one who administers that. Who would do this? They were all the employees of the city hall practically and famous people. So obviously fake. They all had, and the actors had all addresses with Oakville, Oak Lane, whatever. So who would do this? Obviously not someone who supported the work of the ad hoc tree committee, which we all did, since such an act was obviously detrimental. Also, it was someone with a lot of time on his or her hands that afternoon who was also very determined, but not very clever. This all has the hallmarks of a primitive provocation attempt by someone who wants to discredit and undermine the legitimacy of the public comments. The history of communist regimes is my academic specialization, and so it felt a bit reminiscent of accounts I had heard about communist Czechoslovakia and Poland. The next day, the assistant attorney, Eileen McCain, tried to malign me in her letter. She quoted to me my own description of the Gario Coalition, which says that the group is engaged in education, advocacy, and agitation. The assistant city attorney let me know in no uncertain terms that agitation was not welcome in Lakewood. In fact, she treated me as if I had been engaging in some kind of underhanded, despicable activity. She said, I understand that many, perhaps over half of the total of the comments, are suspect. The public legislative process benefits from open, thoughtful, and civil discourse, not agitation, and certainly not disingenuous submittals, end quote. Let's hope that she just doesn't know the definition of agitation, which according to Oxford Languages is the action of arousing public concern about an issue and pressing for action on it. Example is widespread agitation for social reform. The city professes to want and even require, according to GMA, public participation. And I am in fact helping them achieve that desired public participation for free as a volunteer community organizer. This takes an enormous amount of my time and energy. It's also an honorable civic role. So I've requested an apology from the city for this libelous insinuation meant to cast doubt on my good character. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Minetti. We have James Dunlop. Please state the city you reside and your full name, please.
Hi, my name is James Dunlop and I'm a Lakewood resident. Following through from what Christina just said, I'd like to provide some important corrections to Ms. Spear's report contained in the agenda packet today. I think it's on page 185. Firstly, 5 of those that Ms. Spear says are nameless email addresses do in fact have names that were overlooked, such as Parrot Girl. I think that's just part of an email address. Secondly, the vast majority, except 2 of the about 80 fake submissions came after noon, which I think Christina already mentioned, and should have been disregarded for that fact alone. Thirdly, the author of the report notes that the Action Network comment texts contain exactly the same verbiage, but this isn't actually true. Obviously, they've not been read carefully, so someone's just flicked through them and think they're all the same, but actually this isn't the case. There was a draft of a letter, and so there was a draft that people could add on to, and indeed they did add or change this. And fourthly, comments included in the packet were mixed and chopped up, even though Christina provided them in order. And maybe this is a reason for problems of missing addresses. And whoever was doing this didn't seem to pay proper attention in terms of collating everything. But in terms of what was chopped up, I think there are about 25 comments that were just cut off. I just reading cut off has been cut off, no signature. And so there's been a problem there that needs to be addressed. There was a commentator, sometimes Lakewood, Colorado crops up. There was a commentator from Lakewood, Colorado. So I'm on page 371. So perhaps that should be disregarded. And also, there's someone called Robbie's should be disqualified as having no identifying details. So there's a problem there. So I think that these misleading and untrue statements, they do need to be corrected. And I think, this is an important legal process going on. Getting it wrong has legal ramifications. Not to mention the fact that you've got a blocked email address. I think that is maybe illegal. So I think you've got to sort this out. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Mr. Dunlop. Okay, one more for public comment. Carol Else. Come on down, state your name, your full name, and the city you reside, please.
Yes, hello. I'm Carol Else. I reside in Lakewood. I have resided here for 50 years. And I'm one of those people that chose to make a comment online and could not get through. So it's about trees. So if you want me to do this later or now?
So if you wish for it to be submitted into the public hearing, then you would do it under the public hearing and not during public comment. Otherwise, you'd have to do it twice if you wanted to, I guess. So if you want it to go in the record as Ms. Walker was describing, then that would be during the.
Okay. Is it also possible to leave a written record of what I tried to email?
Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Okay.
You could take that and submit that as your comments.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
If we could just ask if anyone that is online wishes to speak during public comment for them to raise their hand.
Yep. Okay. Yep. If there's anyone online wishing to speak for public comment, please raise your hand or write a message in there.
Looks like Mr. Hill.
Okay. Mr. Hill, go ahead.
I will go ahead. I am actually Ms. Hill.
My mistake. I apologize. Yep.
My name is Sean. I'm a longtime Lakewood resident, and I was born in Tahoma. I've lived in this, I'm in Lake City, and I've lived in this neighborhood a long time. There are still a lot of trees, and I'm hoping in a couple of years that will still be the case. I realize there are probably oaks and pine trees that are hundreds of years old, and I think we need to preserve them. One of the reasons being our continued hot summers and the chunky air in August. All those tall trees provide air scrubbing, and we need to keep them because I doubt in our lifetimes we have time to regrow them. So our trees are being stunted from the heat and the lack of rain from above, and they're also being attacked by ivy from below. I wonder if it's advantageous to the city and developers to see all these beautiful trees being consumed by ivy, but it is invasive, and I think we should get rid of it. And I think we need to protect the trees and eliminate our bad air as much as we're able and not develop more heat islands. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Anyone else online wishing to speak for public comment?
Mr. Chair, I want to confirm for the people who are online that, and I say this because it sounded like the comment was relevant to trees, that comment would not be part of the legislative record for your public hearing. And so I just want to make sure that those who are online understand comments now will not be in the legislative record. Comments later are welcome and will be in the legislative record.
Yep. Okay, so Ms. Hill, if you wish to speak again during public hearing, you're more than welcome to, but these comments again will not be, okay. So yes, I will see you later then. Okay, so does that wrap up public comments? I don't see anyone else in here wishing to speak on public comment. Anyone here? That wraps that up. And then we're moving to public hearing. And we have Ms. Brunel to provide an overview of the topic before the public hearing.
Thank you, Chair. This evening, I'd like to introduce Lisa Gruder, who will provide a brief project background and summary of the proposed changes.
Thank you, Courtney, and good evening, Chair and Planning Commission. I'm Lisa Gruder. I'm a principal planner with Burke Consulting. And we were assisting the city with the tree code update. I'm going to give a brief overview of the proposal. It's contained in your packet in the staff report around page 7. Just a little bit of background. In 2021, the City Council responded to community concerns about the tree code implementation, and they approved a public participation plan in November 2021, and a scope of services for Burke Consulting, assisted by Planet Geo, to help support a tree code evaluation and a public participation process. The City Council formed the ad hoc committee to consider the tree code update in early 2022. And that committee met in March and April of this year. And they made about a dozen recommendations that came before the Planning Commission in May. And you spent May and June in study sessions reviewing the ad hoc committee recommendations and discussing potential code changes that are before you this evening in the red lines. So my goal is just to breeze through those high-level summary red lines to set the stage for the hearing. So the main part of the changes are in Title 18A, Article 3, in 18A 7300 and following. And it begins with the exemptions. So what is subject to the tree code regulations. And you'll see some adjustments being proposed to improve protection, particularly for Gary Oaks. And there's some other changes to require that industrially zoned properties be subject, and that any property with Gary Oaks would be subject to review, including residential properties. And you'll see that carried through other parts of the code for significant tree preservation, that some adjustments are being made to the standards, the size of trees reviewed for Gary Oaks, also called Oregon white oaks, would be based on a size of 4 inches instead of 6 inches. And there would be other adjustments to standards and incentives for all trees, in addition to the additional protections for Gary Oaks. And so that includes, in addition to the standards that apply to trees, that includes adding incentives to help protect trees. And this was, a lot of these recommendations are similar to the ad hoc committee recommendations. They also reflect the Planning Commission's review of implementation and improved implementation and adjustments to balance the permit review process. So I'll just go down the page a little bit here. Oh, got it. Okay. I was using a different arrow. Thank you, Courtney. And so there's additional sections that are added in particular for Gary Oaks that add required protections during both permit review and also during construction. And there's an additional opportunity to do an area-wide tree management mitigation process. Another set of requirements that were modified based on the ad hoc committee recommendations and the Planning Commission's review were around the tree fund, and including the additional provisions for penalties, as well as permit fees being used for tree protection in the city through that tree fund. Another section that was added based on the ad hoc committee recommendations was to allow for a heritage tree process. And so section LMC 2.48, which is a landmark preservation section of the code, would be amended to allow for landmark designation of trees. So that would be a new section. I mentioned this here because it's in the table and it was before the Planning Commission in your study sessions in June. But the page with the actual changes to LMC 2.48 was omitted from the packet. It's been added to the online packet, I believe, Ms. Spear. It's at page 13, and I believe copies have been handed out to the Planning Commission. And for those online, it's page 13. We'll go there in a moment after I do the overview. The other major sections that are outside the tree protection code but are part of the incentive package are in other parts of the zoning code in 18A, B, and C that allow for alternative standards to things like setbacks and height and other standards to allow for flexibility and design to help protect tree preservation. That's also a reflection of the ad hoc committee recommendations. So the second part of the code changes are on table 3, and they have to do with the critical areas regulations. And that also has to do with further protections for the Oregon white oak. Currently, the city protects Oregon white oak stands of trees. The proposed changes would add individual trees that are over 20 inches to be protected through the critical area regulations. There are also standards to allow for an administrative reasonable use for modest size homes and developments. And where those standards cannot be met, then the standard reasonable use process with the hearing examiner would apply. And there are other definitions that are added that are detailed in your packet that would help administer this code, including a definition of Oregon white oak trees and tree stands that is more closely matching the State Department of Fish and Wildlife definitions. That's an overview of the major sections of the code before you. And I'm going to go to page 13, which has that page with the heritage trees. So here we go. Page 12 was the comprehensive plan goal. Page 13 is the protection and preservation of landmarks. And so section 040 would have the ability for that landmark commission to designate heritage trees as a landmark, basically. And this code was before you in June at one of your study sessions, and we apologize for omitting it from the packet. But it basically links up to the changes in Article 3, the Tree Protection Code, that offer this as an option. And this is the other part of the code that corresponds where that landmark commission would then be able to designate such trees. So, Mr. Chair, that's our overall summary.
Okay, thank you. So next on the list is Ms. Walker, if she wants to explain the public hearing process. I think you've kind of already done that a couple times.
I've done that a couple times. I did want to just underscore that we have a lot of people here tonight. Each speaker, 3 minutes, so that we can get through everyone, and expect to hear lots of different points of view. That's why we have these processes. We want to hear all of the input that you bring here. Don't expect engagement from the commission. They are basically here to have all the public input put into the legislative record. And once we close that hearing period, the legislative record at that point is closed. Arguably, there are times when we reopen it for different reasons, but we won't get into, if somebody says something particularly shocking or compelling tonight, that won't stop the process. We will take the public input and then give it some thoughtful consideration. And when I say we, it is the commission itself. So without further ado, 3 minutes per speaker. And we may bounce back and forth a little bit so that people aren't disadvantaged because they phoned in. But that will be up to you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that. So before we get to the folks in here, Ms. Brunel was going to summarize the comments received in writing.
Thank you, Chair. Prior to the public hearing this evening, the city received 204 public comments, which were sent to you and published online on Friday, July 1st. To advertise for the public hearing, a postcard was mailed to every Lakewood resident. Additionally, notice was posted in the News Tribune, on the city's website, and on social media. As I mentioned, a total of 204 written comments were submitted. Of the 204, 88 were submitted separately by individuals via email. 116 of the comments were submitted through the Action Network and contained similar verbiage, and 44 sets of comments through the Action Network were sent from unconfirmed email addresses and/or unconfirmed individuals. Some comments were submitted under the names of city council members and city staff. Due to the large volume of messages submitted at one time, the city's cybersecurity software prevented the messages initially from going directly into staff inboxes. I would like to confirm that I did not submit public comments via this platform. Additionally, we have received confirmation from Tiffany Spear, Heidi Wachter, city council members, the city manager, John Caulfield, David Buer, Paul Busich, Ta Kraus, Brianna Schumacher, Mary McDougall, and Rafiq Gindi, that they did not use this platform to submit public comments on this topic. Although their names are listed with a lalewood.us email address. Since they were all submitted public comments, they have been included in the packet for your review. Once we became aware of the blocked messages, our IT team recovered all of the Action Network email addresses, and the Community and Economic Development Department staff attached the 116 messages with a table of contents for your reference. Platforms such as Action Network are commonly used by advocacy groups. Once an individual fills out the required fields, a copy of the signed letter is typically sent directly to city staff via email. This type of email correspondence is likely a wave of the future and something that we may see more of, particularly as we review projects that garner a lot of public attention. A full table of contents for all 204 submitted comments was also posted online in the packet for this evening and is printed on the back table for members of the public here to reference. Thank you, Chair. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Ms. Brunel. And I will start calling people off my list here. Ken Severe? Thank you. Please state the city you reside and your full name, please.
My name is Ken Severe, and I'm a 45-year resident of Lakewood. I read through the information that was published about the commission, and I'm one of these people. I get disappointed when I see a tree cut down, and I'm especially disappointed when I see the wrong tree planted in the wrong place. I'm a 32-year retired worker of Tahoma Public Utilities, and I know Mr. Estrada is familiar with being trees planted in the wrong place at the wrong time. I know that the constant removal of trees is disturbing because they're one of the big carbon absorbers of free carbon in the atmosphere. I think when you look at the information about who decides what kind of trees are to be removed, I think you need to take the landscape architect out of the list. I think the only person that should determine whether the tree is diseased or doesn't belong there should be a certified arborist. I remember the last time I addressed the city council about trees was when the landscape plans for the intersection at Bridgeport and Pack Highway was presented. And that landscape architect wanted over 100 Douglas fir trees planted on the four corners of that intersection. I mean, 2 would have been too many because they do get big and they are dangerous in that when they're planted alone, they tend to drop things in the wrong places at the wrong time. I think another thing you have to consider is when you ask for a tree to be replanted in place of an oak, you're talking about, I think, 3 or 4 inches diameter and 4 foot from the ground. Do you realize how big a root ball that is? You're not going to find a tree like that at Lowe's or Home Depot. You have to have the thing trucked in from some distant nursery from somewhere in the mountains somewhere. That thing's going to cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get delivered and planted. Now, if a guy cut down a tree illegally, yeah, make him plant a tree like that, make him pay the costs. But if the average citizen has to take a tree down on his property, you can replace it with something much smaller that's still going to grow. You have to consider the trees will grow. And that's another thing you ought to consider, that when somebody wants to plant a tree on the street or near utility lines, that they should get approved by the local utility that has the wires, Tahoma Power, Lakeview Light and Power, and PS&E. Because if you plant a tree that's going to mess with the wires, it's going to be a problem. Another thing the citizens have to realize, if you plant a tree near a curb or a gutter or a sidewalk, that tree may lift the sidewalk, may move the curb. When the city planted, oh well.
Thank you. All right. We have Karen Colleran. Thank you. Please state the city you reside and your full name.
I'm Karen Colleran and I reside in Lakewood. I thank the Tree Advisory Committee, or I thank the Tree Advisory Committee for their work in support of the tree preservation in Lakewood. There's a lot of pages in there and I just commend them for getting through it all. I've lived in Lakewood for 76 years and it's hard to watch the land and tree devastation that has gone on in the last 20 years. But hopefully with this report, we can make a difference. I support the canopy goals to 40% by 2050, but I know it's going to be difficult. I would like it to be even higher. I would also like to see a nursery program, growing trees. But we got to think about how long that would take to have trees that would actually work for the community. I'd like to have the, I lost my train of thought here. I'd like commercial and public land be more regulated because I think it's become unfair to the homeowner when some of the things that are going on in the business and real estate areas. I'm glad to see particular appreciation for Gary Oaks, but this is not new. Businesses like the Lakewood Colonial Center built their buildings around the Gary Oaks in the 1940s, and you can still see it's a beautiful site along Gravelly Lake Drive. Sadly, the Villa Plaza took down every tree on the property to begin our ugly trend, and the town center continues to struggle to grow a place for people to gather. Cement and new trees just don't have the same effect as trees grown for decades, and the city needs to step up and show by example how to use those trees in all areas of development. A good example of this was the Tensler Library. The Oaks were there first, and they designed the Tensler Library around them. Will the city honor those Oaks and the library as it's moved? We have to start with the Lakewood city and its land and tree management. The city needs to set the example for our citizens. We need to see how the Lakewood commercial and public lands are judged in terms of tree preservation and beauty before we can expect homeowners to step up and comply. In the last 8 years, I have witnessed.
Thank you, Ms. Colleran.
You're welcome.
We have Helen Wagner. And please state the city you reside and your full name, please.
Good evening. I am Helen Wagner. I live in Lakewood and have for a number of years. First of all, I want to commend the Tree Committee for improving the status of Lakewood trees. However, there is a loophole in the proposal that causes me concern. Solving that problem may be a bit tricky. When a property owner or contractor wants to remove a tree that has been deemed significant, all he needs to do is pay a fine, admittedly a hefty one. Important trees are irreplaceable. Therefore, there should be no negotiation. This may seem, quote, un-American, unquote, since the mindset throughout our history has been that one should be allowed to do as he wishes with his property. Of course, that is part of our ecological emergency. Don't tell me what I can and can't do. Furthermore, if someone is contemplating selling his property, he will resist labeling certain trees as heritage or necessary. as a potential buyer might resist buying something that he cannot alter. Nevertheless, it is unconscionable to let people buy off the system. If a tree is irreplaceable, there can be no price put on its life. In addition, the idea of replanting, when the tree in question is a Gary oak, the slow growth of that replacement makes it impossible for the trade-off to be commensurate. Let us not lose sight of our first responsibility to the trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner. Next, we have Tom Galdabini, and I'm sorry if I... Please state your name and the city you reside.
Commissioner and members, my name is Tom Galdabini. I'm a longtime Lakewood resident. I applaud and support the recommendations of the tree committee. I think they've done really good work. I'd like to support the recommendations. Tonight, I'd like to address specifically Lakewood's Gary oak trees. They're very, very important. We're blessed here in Lakewood to have a large oak population, although it has been declining, I think, very rapidly as a victim of large commercial development. We didn't see that in previous years, and we are seeing it now. A few points about Gary oaks. They are very slow growing, about 1 foot per year for the first couple of decades of their life. And they can live to be 500 years old. So the consequences of cutting them down is pretty serious. Lakewood's near the northern edge of the oak range, although a few scattered stands exist up through southern British Columbia. But here we're blessed with a lot of them. Lakewood's regulation, however, of oak cutting has been lax, to say the least. The mitigation on these trees on a one-to-one basis, which I think is what it's been, or a small contribution to a tree fund is sadly inadequate. I'd like to note that in the early 1990s, a group of Lakewood residents established a volunteer organization called the Tahoma Land Conservancy. We met right over here, primarily to save the magnificent stand of Gary oaks on the old Flett Dairy property. Some of you remember that. We were successful, and now the trees are under the protection of the Clover Park Technical College, providing wonderful wildlife habitat and a beautiful grove that will be protected in perpetuity. Another example of local interest in this iconic tree species comes from the Morse Wildlife Preserve, which is out in the Graham area. The federal government issued a grant for the planting of Gary oaks on this former farmland. Volunteers planted approximately 150 oaks from seedlings and locally gathered acorns in the area of about a mile around it. This was 20 years ago. The volunteers watered them for 2 years consistently, caged the trees individually, and cut the grass around the trees to keep them alive. The survival rate of planted oaks is normally about 30 to 50%. It's not that good. I'm sorry, but
Thank you, Mr. Galdabini.
yeah, we achieve 90% out at the other property, so it's important. It's expensive.
Yeah. Looks like I have Mark Pfeiffer. Please state your full name and the city you reside.
Mark Pfeiffer, Lakewood, Lake City neighborhood. Few points. Canopy. I believe the goal that was set in the ad hoc committee report was 40%. And 40% is, I guess, is okay. It's quite a bit more than what we have now, depending on how you measure that. But if that 40% isn't distributed properly, you can wind up with huge swashes of real estate that don't have any canopy at all. So that needs to be factored in. I didn't see anything in the report that actually addressed that. Incentivization. You know, most of what we think about in terms of preserving trees and things like that is we come up with a punishment scheme for landowners. Here's what we're going to do to you if you cut a tree, or here's what it's going to cost you to cut a tree. Maybe we also need to start thinking about mitigation. In other words, let's take, for instance, impermeable surfaces on family home sites. I think the 60%, I believe, is somewhere around the maximum impermeable surface. It might be a little bit more. But if there are significant trees, particularly oaks, maybe there can be a trade-off. Maybe they'd like to have a wider driveway for extra car parking, or maybe they'd like to have the footprint of the house a bit larger. And perhaps there could be an algorithm set up that provides a trade-off where we incentivize and make people want to preserve those trees instead of making them jump through hoops to get the authority to cut a tree. Arborist selection. You know, if you want to buy a house and take out a mortgage, the bank doesn't get to select the appraiser. There's a third-party organization that the bank has to go to, and then on a random basis from a select group, but unbeknownst to the bank who it's going to be, that third-party organization selects the organization that's going to do the appraisal. And that all came out of, I believe, the bubble of 2000, when we went through an awful lot of pain because real estate was progressing so fast that we don't care if it's overappraised. You know, banks love to loan the money. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Pfeiffer. Okay, next we have up Lynne Meyer. Lynne Meyer. Oh, okay. You don't wish to speak? That, okay. Sure.
Hi, I'm Lynne Meyer. I'm a resident of Lakewood for the last 30 years. And I had a question about Lakewood versus the property that's owned, I'm assuming, by Clover Park and the school district. Are these regulations for trees going to affect them at all?
I would have to defer.
That's a question. I can just leave it and ask you to look into that. We have behind us, we have a huge stand of Gary Oaks in John Dower Elementary, and I'd like to see them stay.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Mhm.
Marie Brown. Okay. All right. Okay. Bob Warfield.
Good evening, Bob Warfield, 143 Candlewick, great city of Lakewood, 98499. I have a relationship with the Gary Oak. It's about as old as me. It bears a scar from a dozer blade when the house was built. It is slowly, unrelentingly bucking my driveway, but it provides cafeteria and recreation for visiting fauna year round. In late fall, it gives me a hard time, but like I say, it's a relationship. It reminds me of broad stands of native oak and untrammeled Camas prairie free of Scotch broom, now a remnant or a memory. Neither you nor I can restore that, but what we can do is what you are doing by advocating this revised code. Trees, by their stately form and radiant seasonal dress, foremost represent the calm urbanity of cities around the world, from Berlin, London, Paris Promenade, to Winchester sidewalks, Renton bus stops, and Bridgeport Way beyond Leech Creek. Trees express what we all want community to be. Places of welcoming tradition and vibrant life with a touch of tranquility. I applaud the work of the advisory committee, related comments of Tahoma Audubon, and I appreciate the spirited volunteer service you bring to city planning. Founding this revised code will require funding, new program and position, and will be the new chick in the nest with established competing siblings. For that reason, all should be mindful that operational funding will be critical to the success of implementation and enforcement, with periodic review to keep resources abreast of program requirements. As we fly the digital sky enthralled with a parachutist's fixation on canopy, I urge equal attention going forward to three considerations. One, clean air is wonderful, urban balance a challenge, but our city cannot redress the ravage of the Amazon. Still, as we all save up for our next Tesla, let us be hopeful that warehousing will not come to define Lakewood. As we care for trees and get to work on canopy, let us remember that we appreciate trees foremost at street level, with senses that typically operate at 3 to 6 feet above the sidewalk. Three, finally, city staff will have to administer the regulations that we intend and promulgate to improve our city, along with other concerns and tireless consulting. Let us not forget them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warfield. Next, we have Christina Minetti.
Hello, my name is Christina Minetti. I've lived in Lakewood since 1972, and I'm a property owner. I have many large trees on my properties, including 4 Gary oaks. I'm here tonight to voice my support for the proposed tree code amendments and to urge further amendments. Without more of those on the table now, we'll have little chance of complete success. I was a little disturbed that it says that only oaks over 20 inches will be considered critical areas. So I think that, considering that that would already be more than a 200-year-old tree, if you allow the other ones, the smaller ones, to be cut down, we'll never have bigger ones. So I think really that should be revised downwards. One of the glaring deficiencies in the current tree preservation code is that the critical areas are essentially unprotected. In the end, even in a critical area, or anywhere else where tree preservation is required, in Lakewood, it is fine to cut down every tree as long as mitigation fee is collected, except maybe on shorelines, I know. Such mitigation is inadequate at best, and for Gary oaks, as many experts would tell you, it's impossible. For the most part, this mitigation fee, at least in the case of Gary oaks, is just a pile of paper, in no way mitigating for the loss to those critical areas. This, despite the GMA stipulation that there shall be no net loss of critical areas. In order for in lieu mitigation to have any chance of working at all, there would have to be a program in place with protocols for how those fees are to be spent. Lakewood does not have that. The city would have to define, and designate a specific area where Gary oak woodland is proposed to be established, restored, or enhanced. Consider the model of the wetland mitigation bank. Developers pay mitigation fees, which are then used to restore and upgrade a designated wetland. An additional loophole is the SEPA exempt status of short plat subdivisions. There was one such case on Alpharetta earlier this year, which resulted in small lots with no protections for Gary oaks on it, part of a larger grove. There's another similar situation now that's going to happen at St. John's Lutheran Church on Bridgeport. That's where I went to Bible class when I was very small. And so the problem of SEPA exemption for short plats has been overlooked, it seems, and needs to be addressed. Both this proposal and the underlying code, which makes it possible. There is clearly foreseeable adverse environmental impact of failing to address this very issue in the proposed amendments to tree preservation ordinance. There is a clearly predictable net loss of trees, canopy coverage, and environmental benefits from the failure to address this specific issue, which needs to be resolved before any finalized version of the amendments are enacted. Thank you for your serious attention to these most pressing matters. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Minetti, for your comments. Next, we have James Dunlop.
Hello, my name is James Dunlop and I'm a Lakewood resident. I would like to support the recommendations of the Ad Hoc Tree Committee, and perhaps to my surprise, I think they did an excellent job. One thing I am quite keen on is that there is a licensing regime for tree contractors. And I'm not quite sure what the system is at the moment in Lakewood, but I think it's important that anyone who is involved in cutting down trees in Lakewood as a business, trimming them, whatever, is licensed. I think that is very important. You know, we've seen what has happened when unlicensed contractors get to work. There's also instances, perhaps, of predatory logging, you know, where people, you know, encourage people to cut down trees, you know, for financial reward, there's a financial incentive. So I think that kind of scheme is important. I believe in Lakewood, Colorado, there is such a scheme where you have to be qualified, you have to be, properly insured. And I don't think this is a particularly controversial scheme. I briefly talked about this to David Buer, and from what I don't want to quote him on this too much, but I think he was suggesting that this was something the city is looking at, or is not, doesn't feel as a bad idea. I think also, if you do have a system of licensed tree contractors, you may be able to merge this into the permitting procedure. Because if you had a situation where perhaps if you wanted a tree cut down, God forbid, but if you did, you would, you could perhaps get that permit. The tree contractor could sort that out for you. And the advantage of that would be that where you had illegal tree cutting, where a contractor illegally cut down a tree, the main onus would be on the contractor rather than on the homeowner. So that would mean, you know, one of the complaints people have about, you know, the incentives is that, you know, why should I worry about the fine if it's only, say, $500 for cutting down a tree when I'm benefiting by thousands? So if you had a situation where, say, a tree contractor was fined $50,000, I think the legal system would probably be okay with a tree contractor getting a $50,000 fine and might not reduce it. Whereas, of course, if a homeowner was fined $50,000, the court might have mercy. Anyway, that's what I would like you to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Dunlop. Next, we have Matthew McCarthy.
I'm not Matthew McCarthy, but he had to leave and he left his statement with me, if that's okay. My name is not Matthew McCarthy, but I'm reading this for him, and he lives in Lakewood. He says, I'm here to support the proposed amendments and to ask them to go even farther. I can see that there's a lot of talk about trees here, but we have to understand something important. Trees are just one part of the natural environment. And really, we're talking about habitat where animals and plants are all parts of an interlocking whole. And when you lose a tree, you don't just lose a single object, you degrade the habitat. And we should bear in mind that each tree is a functional community of many organisms. Unfortunately, we are now losing our habitat. I am seeing it in Lakewood as I saw it in California, where I grew up. I was involved in the Redwoods campaign in the late 80s, and I saw how habitat was destroyed. As Joni Mitchell put it in her famous song, you don't know what you've got until it's gone, of course. In California, it has gone. In Lakewood, it is going. Yes, Lakewood is destroying all that is good about Lakewood in the name of development, just like they paved over my hometown near San Francisco. I know you'll tell me that Lakewood needs affordable housing and that this is more important than protecting the natural habitat. Well, if you're legally minded, affordable housing isn't the only thing mentioned in the Growth Management Act. And the importance of the natural environment is also mentioned. They have to be balanced, and the environment always gets the short end of the stick. Further, affordable housing is often a label which developers use to justify anything. We need to build amongst the trees rather than on top of their carcasses. And in a general sense, I do believe that developers, small and big, have to be stopped from destroying what is good about Lakewood. They often don't even live here. They make their money and they go live elsewhere, leaving Lakewood a town of warehouses and concrete. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicholas Smith. Nicholas Smith. Okay. Maybe they left. We'll continue on then. Nicholas Smith. Okay. We'll come back to that later maybe. Okay, so we have Vito and Karen. Oh, I'm gonna. Yep, that. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. Vito Jacobazzi, Lakewood, City of Lakewood. Overall, I concur with Tree Advisory Board's report. And here's some other further comments. Along with preserving significant trees, which is stated in the report, the heritage tree component is great. I think it's appreciated. One thing that's not mentioned is historic trees, is old growth trees. In my neighborhood, I walk by 2 significant firs every day that are over 150 years old. I know they are. I haven't counted rings or anything, but I know they're old. And that's just a little sample of the city of Lakewood. A lot of the oaks are old growth. They're over 100 years old. So that needs to be kept in mind. So heritage trees, that category. The current lot size exemption should be changed. My neighborhood, I look at my lot and I go, if I had 4 firs here, I could take them all down without any real repercussions. That needs to be looked at, or at least a permit, so that we know, the city of Lakewood knows what's coming down. Promote the guidelines to retain healthy trees throughout education and quality stewardship. I think that's real important. I look at neighborhoods and I see ivy all over these wonderful fir trees that are slowly going to die because of the ivy, English ivy. Establish an urban forestry program. This will provide sound guidance for the city. Strive to attain and maintain the Tree Cities USA program. That would be a wonderful thing to strive for. And this may take, I know it's going to take resources and it's going to take time, but it's something that we should strive for. An example is the planting along Bridgeport. Is everybody proud of Bridgeport Way and how it looks? Can't we change that? Can't we make it look better, improve the appearance? And this would also improve with other things like economic development, the tree canopy goals that we have in our plan, and climate change reduction goals. I think it would all help. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobazzi. Okay, next is Kenneth Takati. Please state your full name and the city you reside.
My name is Kenneth Joseph Tokach, and I live in Lakewood since '69. Anyway, I was walking one day and taking a nice walk, and some person was cutting down an oak tree. And I asked him, "Why are you cutting?" He goes, "I don't want to rake the leaves." I called him an idiot, but that didn't help. But anyway, okay, and like in our city, when they plant trees along the roads, they have one side with wires, one side without wires, and they plant them under the wires. Now that's stupid. Plant them where there's no wires so they don't have to cut them, and keep having that Asplin company or whoever it is chopping them down all the time, and then it sends up suckers, and then they break off with ice storms. So, and if there's any trees that are left over on the contract, have an area where you can store them and plant them somewhere else in Lakewood when they need them. I mean, it's common sense. I mean, right along Western State Hospital, they got these black locust trees. And they planted a whole bunch of maples right next to them. So the canopy's in jeopardy and everything. I know the locusts are going to die eventually, but just don't plant them right next to another tree where they're going to interfere with each other. That doesn't make sense. Put them on the other side of the street where there's no wires. You got all those dying, whatever, I don't know what they are, but they're half dead. Plant them along that hedge, whatever that they have growing. Make room for them. Plant them somewhere, but don't plant them underneath the other trees. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Tokaj.
Thank you.
All right. Next we have Gretchen Utkin. Nope. Okay. Man, these names. Ado Akitas. Sorry. I'm bad with the names today.
Okay.
My name's Ado Equitas. I'm the chairman of the Panther Party, and I'm a resident of Lakewood. So I support the amendments. It's great. Amendments can only go so far. The tree preservation plan that the city has is a dumpster fire. You cannot amend it to be good. It's time to throw it out and build something that the people will benefit from. I haven't spoken in front of you guys before. Some of the guys out here know me. The city council definitely knows me. We represent an organization that cares about the people and the people's voice. You got some OGs of agriculture out here. I've been hearing some of these guys throw stuff out and it's like, yo, why ain't they sitting up there? Let the people decide. You guys' amendments are great. Cool. Get a real plan in place where we're not trying to amend this trash bag that the city has built. And then let the people vote on it. Because through this entire process, it has been shown that the city is not paying attention to the people. Christina got blocked. I got blocked, but we all know why. And then when she tried to ask why, they called her an agitator. I'm a professional agitator. I can tell you that is not agitation. That is passion. Listen to the people, or I will bring agitation. Because I will make sure that the people are heard. So you guys keep doing what you're doing. From what I understand, you guys are doing a great job. But make sure you listen to them. Because they've had a lot of great ideas. And I've been seeing some head nodding, and I like that. Because most of the time I come up here and it's just blank eyes. So it's good to see people actually engage. Keep doing that. Listen to them. All power to the people.
Thank you, Mr. Utkin. Or sorry, Aquitas. My mistake. Okay, looks like we have Pat Pasnior, Wasi Pasnior. Oh, is that, okay, yep.
Some years ago, private, and my house is
And sir, in order that your comments be picked up.
My name is Jesse Passmore. I live in Southgate. It's at the end of 512 across South Tacoma Way. There's 300 homes there. And I've been there since 1965. The houses were developed in 1956. And I've planted 10 trees since I've been there. And no one educated me on the trees. And I planted a birch tree in my front yard, but the roots wrapped around my water line. I had to cut it, and I had to put a new water line in. And then I planted, my daughter, we went to Oklahoma, it's my home state, and she liked the magnolias they brought back from Korea, whatever. And she bought one. She was moving, so we put it in my yard, right by the porch. Well, it split my sidewalk, and it grew, but it was a canopy, and I had to trim it. Finally, I had to cut it. And then my neighbor, he had a Douglas fir, and he was pulling everything out. And so he asked, it was a small tree, and he said, "Do you want it?" And I said, "Yeah." And I had a place to. So I planted it over, I've got over 100-year-old Douglas fir, and I planted it too close to that tree. Well, after 40 years, it was taking all the sun away. And I got the McGowan building behind me, and it takes some of the sun away. So I had to cut that tree. It was 40 years old. And so it's like you don't know. And I planted, I've got squirrels, birds. I planted an apricot tree. That was the first tree we planted in the back. And the squirrels just love it. They're all over. They eat all the fruit. But I wanted to ask a question, and does anybody know the best time to plant a tree? When is the best time to plant a tree? What? The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. You know the best next time to plant a tree? Now.
Thank you, Mr. Passner.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
We
you.
had a couple people here that were signed up. I was just gonna offer the opportunity again. Nicholas Smith was one. And then the other one was Gretchen Utkin.
But
were
Mr.
signed
Chair,
up?
you also have a list of people with their hands raised.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's the folks on the list here. And then we have a few online. So I think that's it for in here. And then we can go to the online, and it looks like everyone's got their hands up. Okay, so we'll start at the top of my list with Carlo Manetti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I will do for those online is provide them permission to speak. And when their 3 minutes is over, if they can't hear the beeping that we hear here in the room, I'll just say time is up.
Okay.
So I just want to give people a heads up. That's what'll happen.
Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Manetti.
Yes. Speaking. My name is Carlo Manetti. I am a retired physician and private property owner who has lived here in Lakewood for the last 50 years. I'm speaking tonight to declare my complete support for the three committees' recommendations and to request the city to draft additional amendments that are crucial. This would cover a range of items, as you are hearing from many people this evening. Also, mutilation must not be allowed by utilities, contractors, or property owners, and ivy should not be allowed to cover trees. Such regulations would have prevented the catastrophe behind the Black Angus restaurant. I was completely shocked last year to see that the two large Gary oaks on the property of my former colleague, the orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Hers, had been severely mutilated. The code enforcement officer told my daughter that the owner told him that they had just been, quote, pruned, unquote. If you want to see photos of this case, I can send them to you. They were so brutally cut that they will likely die, but it may take a decade or more. I think the owner was not even fined. This constitutes a clear injury in fact to me as a resident of Lakewood. I pass those Gary oaks often on the way to the post office, and their destruction reduces my aesthetic enjoyment of my environment here, to say nothing of the ecosystem services they provide to all of us. Such things are happening all over Lakewood and worse. The policies that led to this destruction are policies that harm all of Lakewood residents. If there were stricter protections for Gary oaks and other trees, such situations could be avoided altogether. Fines must not be reduced by the court. The laws should protect trees and people who live here and not aid and abet the developers. These above are just a few of many issues that need to have closer attention. In conclusion, I urge you to support the ad hoc three committees' recommendations and recommend additional amendments as well as many others are suggesting here tonight. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Carlo Manetti. Next, we have up Tikimore, I'm just bad with names today, Dunlop. Please state the city you reside and your full name, and it looks like you're on mute, so go off mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
My name is Tahoma Dunlop, and I'm a resident of the city of Lakewood. I'd like to endorse the Ad Hoc Tree Committee's recommendations as a former member of it, and also highlight from those recommendations that in particular, that for any fines handed out for cutting down of trees, in particular Gary oaks, it's important that the contractors be fined just as much as the homeowner, as they were complicit. This would also help decrease the amount of predatory logging going on. In addition, it's important that Lakewood gets proper tree inventory. During the Ad Hoc Tree Committee, Burke Consulting subcontracted Planet Geo to do a supposed tree inventory that stated the percentage tree canopy cover over Lakewood. However, this was inherently flawed. First, it couldn't distinguish between different tree types. This means that even if there were to be theoretically a net positive change in tree canopy cover in Lakewood, that wouldn't necessarily mean a net positive change in Gary oak canopy cover specifically. The topic of Gary oaks is at the top of the list when it comes to thinking about and protecting trees in Lakewood. And the fact that Planet Geo could not and cannot provide data on their populations shows that they are not fit for purpose. In addition, their data seems to be systematically generated from satellite imagery, so I'm very skeptical about the accuracy of that. For a computer, it's very difficult to tell apart the green of, say, a laurel bush from a Gary oak, so I'm suspicious that Planet Geo's numbers may be a severe overestimate of the true amount of tree cover in Lakewood. The solution to this takes time, but gives much more accurate results. A manual tree inventory, including both trees on public and private land. Doing this would give the city precise data on how many trees there are in Lakewood. Currently, if an unauthorized tree removal occurs, it can be quite difficult to retroactively find out when it occurred or even if it occurred at all. Having a detailed tree inventory would allow unauthorized tree removal to be easily detected and any change in tree population to be more easily quantified. Of course, it's critical that this tree inventory includes trees on private land in addition to public land, otherwise it'd be useless. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunlop, for your comments. Next, we have Eric Seibel.
Go ahead, Mr. Seibel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Eric Seibel. I live in Lakewood. I'm with Pierce County Audubon Society. We encourage the City Council to go forward with the Advisory Committee's recommendation to set the City of Lakewood's tree canopy goal for the future to 40% by 2050. This is an ambitious goal, but it is achievable if we act decisively and immediately. In reviewing the proposed ordinances, we're asking for amendments to make the city goal achievable by increasing options for how the city's tree fund will be used by the city as well as by citizens groups and nonprofit organizations. We're asking that the city devote any municipal fees collected for tree removal into a tree fund to be used in creating an urban forest on a suitable tract of land in the city. We also think a watering system will be necessary because of our experience with wetland restoration plans in Pierce County in the 1990s. For example, many of the wetland plans failed within 10 years because of a lack of a watering system and because of lack of care of the plantings. For this reason, we would like to suggest that a watering system be a requirement not only for the first 5 years of planting new groves of trees, but ideally until the 2050 goals for forest canopy is achieved. This is more important now than in past decades. The summer droughts we have experienced in the last several years are going to become longer and drier as high summer temperatures will break new records. Okay, so I've been reading my statement and I just want to get real for a moment. This process needs to be a true preservation effort, not merely guidelines for tree removal. The new codes establish the legal requirements that allow for the cutting of trees for further economic development in the commercial zones and for the removal of trees in residential areas, along public rights-of-way and in critical areas as well. So this goal of increasing the tree canopy to 40% is a bargain made with the city's residents to ensure that long-term, the city tree canopy survives, but also that the canopy is improved and increased, along with the economic development of the city. We can have both. We can. Please consider the amendment we are proposing to create an urban forest in Lakewood. The DNR has an excellent urban forest program, and nonprofit and citizen groups have the capacity to assist the city. There is willingness to do so. But please, this can't happen unless the city creates the right foundation to ensure success. The council needs to make some basic changes to the ordinance that will assure that trees planted to attain the 2050 goal are watered and that the city tree fund has adequate funding to continue to plant trees every year, actually for the next 28 years to reach the proposed goal. I really appreciate the opportunity to testify. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Eric Seibel. And I have a note here that there was someone else in your group. A couple of them had already spoke, but Patricia Federley was going to follow.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully I can be heard. I'm on Zoom.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Patricia Federley. I am a resident of your neighboring city of Tahoma, but I'm here speaking on my own behalf and also on behalf of Tahoma Audubon Society and the Tahoma Garden Club. Both these organizations strongly support the work of the Tree Advisory Committee, and we encourage the City Council to go forward with the recommendations to establish the ambitious goal of a tree canopy goal of increasing the tree canopy for the City of Lakewood to 40% by 2050. It is an ambitious goal, and I think we have to look to the experiences of other jurisdictions to see how such a goal can realistically be carried out. And for these reasons, we strongly support the amendment proposed by Tahoma Audubon concerning the mechanism for carrying out the tree fund. as a mitigation fund. Lakewood's tree ordinance is like all others. It really doesn't protect, as drafted, it doesn't really protect the Gary Oaks in critical areas, and it doesn't stop large distribution centers from cutting down hundreds of trees. The ordinance has an escape clause that allows any developer to pay a fee in lieu of replacement on the existing property. This policy puts pressure on the city planners to negotiate changes to save trees in the development plan and allows for the building to be repositioned on the property to save as many trees as possible. In the past, several companies were able to redesign their properties to save many trees, but once the fee is collected, the city planning has to find places to plant the lost trees. To ensure a forest plan and purchase of the property and planting and creating a water irrigation system, the city planners have to take the initiative. To ensure success, it's very important that the civil penalty to replace trees is revisited annually to determine if it continues to charge the real cost of acquiring land, planting the trees, and watering the trees so that they will flourish. In Tacoma, for 10 years, fees in lieu of creating a wetland were set too low. After a decade of collecting fees, Tahoma Audubon proposed using the wetland fee fund to buy an existing wetland on the south side of the town. The land cost for the property in Tacoma per square foot had never been raised to market rate. As a result, there was not enough in the city's wetland fund to buy a single wetland, and there was not enough money to even match the existing grants for a wetland. Most important, the fee in lieu of replacing a wetland was not high enough to give the planners a strong negotiating position to bargain with builders and landowners. It was simply cheaper for the builders to pay the fee. So with that, we urge the adoption of Tahoma Audubon's amendment to the plan. Thank you.
That's your 3 minutes. I appreciate your comments. Okay. Looks like we have next is, was there, oh, it doesn't know. Okay, Judith Minetti.
Go ahead, Ms. Minetti.
Looks like you're on mute.
Hello.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. My name is Judith Minetti. I'm a resident and private property owner in Lakewood. I've lived here for 50 years. I'm making a public comment to declare my strong support for the tree committee's recommendations and to press city to draft additional amendments. I'm concerned about the trees in Lakewood. Climate change will adversely affect all of them. I feel it's extremely important that the community make every effort to preserve trees, especially Gary Oaks, whenever and wherever possible. We and future generations need them for the many benefits they provide. As a property owner, I understand what it's like to need to change certain features on your own property. When the government enacts regulations prohibiting homeowners from making personal choices, people feel their rights are being denied. I understand that. Nevertheless, this situation clearly calls for strict regulations, especially regarding Gary Oaks. Heritage trees, which must be clearly defined, and critical areas. Gary Oaks deserve protection, especially in Lakewood, where they're so important and iconic. Protecting such trees should not be at the mercy of a property owner. A tree inventory must take place on private lands too, and heritage trees must be designated regardless of whether they are on private or public land. If they're on private land, the property owner has the obligation to care for and not destroy them. People's injudicious decisions often quickly destroy what nature has taken many years to produce. Certain situations require the removal of trees, but before the homeowner takes action, a highly qualified and independent tree specialist needs to inspect the trees. The code should specify that it should not be done by one hired by the property owner. The city should issue only limited removal permits for truly exceptional cases, and Gary Oaks should not be removed at all unless it is truly unavoidable, as decided by that specialist, the arborist or the tree surgeon. Permits should not be pro forma. As others have said, in conclusion, I urge you to support the ad hoc tree committee's recommendations and recommend further additional amendments as well, as many others have suggested here tonight. Thank you.
Sean Hill.
Go ahead.
Hello, hi, I'm Sean Hill. I'm a Lakewood resident. And I have noticed that a lot of trees have fallen to developers and to ivy. The ivy chokes the trees, basically smothers them so that they can't breathe, they can't photosynthesize. And it's a shame. We all like shade, we all like fresh air. We need as many trees as possible. I believe that we should adopt many of the ordinances set forth by the ad hoc committee and go further and adopt some of the regulations that Oak Harbor has instituted, especially in the area of ivy mitigation and removal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean Hill. Next we have Christy Jennings. Please state the city you reside and your full name.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm on a different computer right now, so this is not my name. My name is Pepper Lazowski, and I live in Los Angeles, California. I have come here to ask you to please listen to the community about what changes need to happen to the tree code. I too am a part of the community because what you decide for Lakewood, you decide for our planet. The changes I talk about are to protect these Gary Oaks. Well, that's the small reason. The big reason is by protecting the trees, you're protecting all the living beings, humans, animals, and insects. And by protecting them, you're protecting nature. And by protecting nature, you're protecting the environment. And by protecting the environment, you're protecting the earth we are all lucky enough to live on. I keep hearing stories about the Gary Oaks being cut down there in Lakewood. In other words, stories about the council not understanding the impact of this on our neighborhoods and planet. So once again, I'm here to ask that you please expand these tree code changes and please respect the trees, the animals, nature, the environment, and the earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, could you please give us your name one more time, a little slower?
Pepper Lazowski, and I'm 12 years old.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next up we have Matthew Couch.
Go ahead, Mr. Couch.
Looks like you're on mute.
There we go. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. My name is Matthew Couch. I've owned property in Lakewood for more than 11 years now. I'm in my 30s and I'm raising a family here. This is my first time addressing the commission. I declare my strong support in enhancing the legal protections for trees in alignment with the recommendations of the ad hoc committee. One of the primary reasons I purchased property here in Lakewood is because of the Gary Oaks. I got a property, I live on about a third of an acre, and I have a big old Gary Oak in my backyard. It's approximately 300 years old. It is an incredible tree. As the homeowner of today, I should not have the right to rob future generations of the canopy, shade, and beauty of this old tree, which may last even for another 200 years. We recognize that buildings can hold historic value and that they should be preserved and maintained for future generations. So too, we should recognize the historic value of these trees and preserve and maintain them from the homeowners of today, and more importantly, the developers who will clear cut everything for a new development or a parking lot. We all witnessed last year's heat wave and are well aware that trees help mitigate this heat. Many cities are realizing that clear cutting of trees during development is certainly contributing to their issues with heat. Let not Lakewood be one of those cities. A tree inventory must be completed, including the trees on private property. We must protect and steward these trees for ourselves, for our children, and theirs. I strongly urge you to support the recommendations of the Ad Hoc Tree Committee. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Matthew Couch, for your comments. And then looks like we have Rachel Mackey online as well.
Go ahead. You're on mute.
Please state your name and where you reside.
My name is Rachel Mackey. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
And I am a resident of Lakewood. I haven't lived here that long, maybe about 10 years. But I'm a private property owner. And I would like to support the proposed tree amendments, though I do believe that they need to be further extended. Like, they've done great work. I'm happy with the work that they have done, but I still think there is some work that could be done to really make sure that the trees are preserved. And I live not far off of Gravelly Lake, where there are lots of Gary oaks, and I live in part of the canopy. And I'm kind of just wondering, just in living there, obviously, basically what everybody else has been saying, that, you know, I benefit from it, but also I've seen lots of trees getting cut down, especially right next door to me. There was probably a 300 to 400-year-old tree next door that was cut down. And that's really concerning to me. You know, obviously we know that trees are great protection for shade and making sure that that the air is, you know, preserved as well. I do understand that property owners have rights, but I also think that making sure that the Gary oaks are preserved, and that absolutely needs to be done. And unfortunately, not just myself, but my neighbors also have been impacted greatly by the neighbor cutting down the tree, and it's impacting the community. And unfortunately, because they take so long to grow, right? Like, it's obviously not going to happen within my lifetime again. And now that it's been cut down, it's something that's not going to be extended. So another suggestion is that they look at instituting tree protection zones, which I guess the city is able to do. And it's based on Department of Natural Resources, which shows where the canopy is and making sure that they are preserving, you know, creating a protection zone so that they can't further cut down trees within that canopy. So to conclude, as a private owner who's suffered greatly from these adverse effects of the trees being cut down, I once again support the ad hoc committee's proposed amendments, and I hope that they those into consideration and even go further.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Rachel Mackey. We appreciate it. So that we've gone through everyone in the room and online. Is there anyone else wishing to speak under the public hearing for the tree preservation code update? Anyone else in here wish to come on down and speak for a few minutes?
There was an individual who asked about being able to speak if she hadn't signed up. I don't see her here at this point, so I apologize for that distraction.
All good.
If the commission is satisfied that they've heard from everyone, the next proper action is to close the hearing.
Yep. Alrighty. I don't see or hear any other one that wants to comment. Let's see here. So with that, we will close the public hearing. All the comments relevant to the proposed tree code amendment will be taken into account by the Planning Commission as we develop our recommendations for City Council. So I appreciate everyone's comments and bearing with us while we had to wait for half an hour to start them, but thank you. So we do appreciate it. And that concludes our item 6 on the agenda, the public hearing. So now I guess where are we at? We did unfinished business. Or no, we're to item 7, unfinished business. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yes, Mr. Chair.
And do we want to continue with anything or?
I have nothing further, just checking with Ms. Purnell if she wanted to have anything else tonight.
Okay.
At this point, the Planning Commission was also invited to have discussion regarding the public hearing at your next meeting on July 20th that we are
July
scheduled.
13th.
So July 13th, the tree preservation code is not currently scheduled before you. So if there's any further amendments that you would like to see to the ordinance in advance of July 20th, we are inviting that discussion now. There were a few topics that came up tonight that we have not yet addressed, several of them related to the urban forestry program. There were also some concerns regarding the preservation of Gary oak trees and essentially allowing a fee in lieu for critical areas. There has been a proposal to allow for a reasonable use exception in place of what we have today, which is in critical areas having current planning staff try to negotiate with the developers. The recommendation is that we would go through the reasonable use exception route, which would require a public hearing. So that is one point of clarity that I did want to provide. And currently, there were several comments made regarding the canopy coverage goal, and the Planning Commission's existing draft shows 30% rather than the adopted 40%. So at this point, we would invite any comments from the commission. And if you would like, we can come back on July 13th for additional conversation as well, prior to coming forward for final adoption on July 20th.
Thank you, and thank you for walking me through that. So anyone on the commission wish to speak on any comments or changes to what we've seen?
We're going to have one more meeting before we make a recommendation.
I think we're supposed to take action next meeting. Is that
Actually, Mr. Chair, the way it's scheduled right now is June 13th or July 13th, the week from tonight. If you wish, you could continue this discussion that evening. And then the following week, so 2 weeks from tonight, it would be the 20th. Is when you're scheduled at this point to take action. But if you
Okay.
need more time, that's fine.
So we'll be discussing today and then next week, and then we could take action
On
the
the
3 weeks
20th.
in a row. Yeah.
Well, the one thing that I heard tonight, and I think we touched on a little bit before, but somebody mentioned having a kind of like a tree farm or something that people could get plants that we think are the right ones, or what we want as a city to have there. That made sense to me. So it'd be interesting to have that fleshed out. I know, again, that's a cost item. But if we have the right kind of trees and they're available to people, that kind of made sense to me in some of the things that were commented on tonight.
Okay.
I'd like to get Mr. Buer's comments next time we meet on the certified arborist and having that setup that we had heard from a citizen out there, and if that would make sense and basically streamline the process in some ways, and see if that's a possibility. And then I also heard a lot around ivy, which I don't know if the tree committee had addressed, if there was anything in there to discuss or find out on that portion.
Doesn't ivy fit onto the noxious weed? What's that? It's not in Pierce County, really? Wow, okay.
Okay.
So that's a question I had for an overall group for next week.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, just so you're aware, Mr. Buer is not in town again until the 20th, but Ms. Brunel and the contractors working on this project should be able to answer those questions.
Perfect. All right. And Mr. Estrada?
We had a few comments regarding a tree inventory. I don't remember seeing that at all addressed in the report. Did I miss it, or was it in fact there?
Mr. Estrada, during some of our earlier discussions, we did discuss the tree inventory options. I believe that at that time, Planet Geo had said that it would be several hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to be able to complete a comprehensive tree inventory for private and public properties. They have provided us with some information as to what that would look like on just public land. Alternatively, what was recommended is that if we did move forward with a recommendation for an urban forestry department, that we would utilize GIS imaging in order to get more concrete data, including stem counts on individual properties, which we do not currently have with the existing GIS data that Planet Geo has provided.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I make a recommendation? As long as you don't engage in a discussion by email, if there are questions between now and the next time you meet, if you would send those through Courtney, through Ms. Brunel, what they will then be able to do is make a report for you that indicates the questions that have been brought to their attention and what the responses are. And I don't know if you've noticed, she's been taking furious notes all night. So she's taken down the questions that you've asked here tonight, but after an hour and a half of public hearing, I think I would have trouble coming up with every question that I have. So as long as you don't expect a response immediately by email, what they can do is take the questions that have come in from you as individuals, don't necessarily send them to each other, just to her. She can come back with a report for you with the questions that you've asked. They can make it part of your packet, and that makes it really clear for everybody, if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I had a couple of comments. I'm not having it offhand, but the tree permit, it was like a one-page form. Did that have the contractor, you had to be a licensed and bonded or insured contractor on there?
Yes, and the recommendation at this stage would be that we would have an ISA certified arborist. That has been recommended in the proposed ordinance. And we do currently check business licenses for any proposed contractor on existing permitting. So that would be something that we would continue to do for tree removal permits under the new revised process.
That's what I figured was the case. Thank you. And then the fines, if you have an arborist cut down a tree, or anyone cut down a tree, the fine, would that go to the homeowner or the contractor, or is it shared?
I believe the way that the ordinance is proposed is that it would have both would be cited, which currently we would cite both the contractor and the property owner. For example, if there was a building violation or a construction violation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other comments here?
I think we have some incentives, and that was brought up again here tonight. And, maybe we should think about, his comments were that you're only allowed to put pervious stuff, concrete and stuff in your yard. And you could maybe have a few more square feet of that if you had more trees or something like that. I like the incentive rather than punishment. That always makes sense to me.
And then my final comment, it's been my comment in the past about the single tree critical area. I would wish that would be struck out from the code change. I don't know what my fellow commissioners have to say about that, but that's the one thing that I have a gripe about with this code change. The single 20-inch tree being a critical area.
So to summarize, and thank you, Ms. Wachter, for your recommendation that comments be forwarded to me ahead of our next meeting. We will be back before you next week. And if you could provide any comments by Friday, that will give us a couple of days in advance of the next packet being published 24 hours in advance. There may unfortunately be some information that's shared with you the day of, because it is a rather quick turnaround time. We will be providing additional information on the urban forestry department, tree inventory, impervious surface, and provide some options for the critical areas ordinance, as well as anything else that is sent to us in advance. Thank you.
All right. So now are we done with number 6?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Great. Okay. So I think we just have unfinished business, which I don't know.
Already took care of the downtown plan, so.
Yep. Okay, discussion on, oh, that's just what we're talking about here then. Discussion coordinating amongst planning commission members regarding the tree code updates and amendments. So yeah, we'll be sending all our comments to Ms. Brunel and
Copy Karen Devereaux,
and
that would be great.
copy, yep, okay, copy Karen. And that would be good to share with the folks that weren't in attendance today.
Yes.
Mr. Daniels, and was anyone attending virtually?
No, we did not have anyone on.
Okay. Larson and Mr. Combs, yep. Yep, okay. Well, with that said, then reports from council, city staff, and I didn't see any council here.
Councilmember Vogt is not here this evening.
Okay, city staff, any updates?
Other than what we're going to talk with you next week about that you just heard, that's it.
Okay. Other than that, then I think that we'll call the meeting adjourned. Anything else? All right. Thank you.